This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive, home of the Name Your Price tool. You say how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote. Visit Progressive.com to get started. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Hey, it's Lindley, not Lindsay.
And AB.
And it's
Murdah Ink. During this podcast, you can expect mom vibes, long laughs in the car by yourself, and true facts about the cases that we cover.
We may or may not get sidetracked just a little bit too much. Like that one time?
We cover mostly true crime, but Lindley, not Lindsay.
Well, I cover basically anything that comes to my mind.
We respect the victims of the story and the cases we cover, but we trash talk the people who deserve it.
We're still funny, though.
We are. We're hilarious. You can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Murdah Ink. That's murder with the AH.
Because we gangsta like that.
We are.
You can become one of our biggest fans. Go check out our socials at Murdah Ink or Murdah Ink Pod. You'll love us or not love us. Either way, it's fine.
And I think that's that on that. We Murdah Ink.
And we out.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, a popular, seemingly happy young college student is found dead, hanging from jumper cables. Was it suicide or murder? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my Les Padiga co-host, Alice.
I feel like you need to be doing a dance when you say that. That was really good. Do you know what you just said?
No, actually, I think I said that better than I thought I would.
That was like really, really good. I have no idea what it means, but you
I believe
said
it
really
is
well.
Latvian.
Oh.
I believe it is Latvian. Excuse me, those of you in Latvia, if it's not. It means impressive. So, and thank you to Lema for sending that in. But a beautiful word and a beautiful language for a beautiful person.
You're just trying to make me feel good because it's just been like one cannonball blasted at me after another at work this week.
It really has. It really has. I mean, I don't know. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, Alice. That's all I have to say, but you're doing a great job, so.
You know what? It is so fun to be back in the office. I know a lot of people are starting to trickle back into the office post-pandemic. Maybe people have already been back in their offices, but I have missed the human element of being able to talk to people and crack jokes. So that I have nothing to complain about, because it's great to see you more often, Brett. I've missed you.
Oh, I miss you too. It's just all I hear is your voice, your disembodied voice. So it's nice to see you again. And it's a crazy time. Like Alice said, everybody's getting back to work. Things are getting back to normal. I know a lot of y'all have been at work for a while, but as the pandemic hopefully finally winds down, we're going to keep on doing the podcast. We've been doing this podcast basically the entirety of the pandemic, but I promise you, the end of the pandemic, if it is actually happening, is not going to stop us from giving you the true crime content that you love. And today we have a case that is interesting, and it's sad, and it's difficult, and it's confusing at times, and that is the case of Dammion Hurd. Now, a lot of you will be familiar with this case because it is the subject of a long-form podcast called Final Days on Earth. So if you're looking for sort of a really deep dive, mini episode podcast on this case, that is one to look at, Final Days on Earth. And, you guys have asked us to cover a lot of cases that have been covered in depth by podcasts like that. We just did Marion Barter and The Lady Vanishes podcast. I think people really enjoyed that. We're going to do this one as well and try and give you the story, what happened, and our theory on the case in a couple episodes. For those of you who either don't like deep dives or you don't want to spend a whole bunch of time, or you want to hear both. You want to hear sort of the short version, and you want to dive deep into the case and see whether or not your opinion lines up either with the Final Days on Earth podcast or with our opinion, because this is a case that is going to divide people, and it is going to cause some discussion. And one thing I'll just say as we start off, and I'm saying this even though I don't have to, because you guys are amazing. We have the best listeners in podcasts, and I see it every day on Reddit and on Facebook. I know you guys are going to discuss this case respectfully. I just want to remind you, this is almost a subgenre of true crime. It's when you have a case that may be a suicide or it may be murder, and you have someone who either way has lost their life tragically, and you have a family that's struggling to deal with that and to find truth and to find out what happened to their loved one. So I would just ask everybody, remember that as you discuss this. This is about more than just what happened. It's also about a victim, and it's about a family, and it's about a person. And, I'm not somebody who tells you not to listen to true crime podcasts because they're inherently bad. That would be a weird thing for me to say as a host of a true crime podcast. But I do think it's something that we should always remember, that these are real stories.
Absolutely, Brett. You're going to hear some things that we're going to talk about today that you won't hear on the Final Days on Earth podcast. So definitely give that podcast a listen if you want a really deep dive into interviews with witnesses. But know here that a lot of people, we're about to dive into Dammion's life, but he was a college student. And I don't know if any of you had a student at your school, whether it be when you're in high school, college, graduate school, who passed away, whether under suspicious circumstances, an accident, or by suicide, but it's something that grips an entire campus, no matter how large or small your school is when it happens, because when you're in college, you are seemingly on top of the world. The world is your oyster. You are away from home oftentimes for the first time in your life, and you are given free reign of all this academic freedom to figure out who you are, what you're going to do with your life, and truly it is an exploratory time intellectually, socially, personally, and no one in that stage of life is really thinking about death. And so when it happens to someone right next to you on your campus, it shakes all of you, whether you knew the person personally or not. And like Brett said, this happened to this small campus here where Dammion went to school. So keep that in mind as we kind of dive into what happens to him.
Yeah, and this is such an important point that Alice makes. We need to be respectful to Dammion. We need to be respectful to his family, but there were a lot of people who were affected by this case, and we need to remember that. Sometimes we throw around words like suspect, or we mention people's names in ways that might imply they might have something to do with a death, and we need to remember those are real people too. And in a case like this, where it might be suicide, it might be murder, if it's suicide, then those people are completely innocent. They're completely innocent victims in a real way who've had their lives turned upside down, who've lost a friend, a close friend. And that is something that we should remember as well. Alice mentions college. I'll tell you guys a short story that I think you'll probably find interesting. Most of you know I went to the University of Alabama, and right after I graduated was the Natalie Holloway case. And those of you who don't know who Natalie Holloway is, which is probably none of you, but she was a high school senior from Alabama who went on a senior trip to Aruba. She disappeared. It's pretty clear that Johan van der Sloot murdered her in one form or fashion, either by giving her drugs or just outright killing her. And she disappeared and was never found. And it was a big mystery. It was something that really gripped a lot of people. She had applied to the same academic program that I was a part of. And I happened to be talking to one of the professors who was in the program, who has since retired. And he was like, yeah, I was in charge of reviewing her application. And as a matter of fact, she was going to have a room in the dorm where I had lived when I was in college. And he was like, yeah, it's right here on my desk. And so her application was sitting there on his desk, and he hands it to me, and I'm looking at it, and it's such a tragic case, and it's crazy to think, this is this girl's dreams and her aspirations and everything else. And I flipped to the back, and the back was a question. It was, talk about something that you are fascinated by. And she had written an essay. It was about a page long. And she said she was fascinated by death and what happens to you after you die. And I just was really blown away by that in a lot of different ways. As you could imagine, reading her thoughts on this sort of great mystery about what happens to you after your life ends, and knowing what had happened to her very shortly after she wrote that. So the death of a young person is always shattering, and it's particularly shattering for the people who know them, because like Alice said, death is supposed to be a long way away. It's supposed to be something that might be intriguing but doesn't feel like a real threat. And when it happens, it can, like I said, shatter an entire community. And that's what happened in this case. Like I said, we're talking about Dammion Hurd, and Dammion Hurd seemingly had everything. He was a popular college wrestler, a freshman, with realistic dreams of winning a national championship in his weight class. Everybody who saw him wrestle said he was incredibly fast, he was very quick, and he was somebody who could take someone down in a matter of seconds. In fact, his dad says that he still holds the record in Texas for the fastest takedown. And any of you guys who know about high school sports in Texas know, if you hold the record in Texas, that's impressive.
It's a big deal. As a
It's a
Texan,
big deal.
I have to say that's a huge deal. And the fact that it's still held, almost a decade later is a big deal.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that you might be, looking at the Olympics. If you can be the best in Texas, you can be the best in the world. And he had a very realistic shot at being a national champion. He was exceptionally close to his father, who we just discussed, and in fact called him almost every day and really talked to him about everything. He had many friends who loved him. It's cliche to say that he was someone who lit up the room when he walked in, but it seems like Dammion kind of was that guy. He just made people happy in Gunnison, Colorado, where he was attending college. But he also had some demons, like everybody does, and it seems like sometimes the happiest people do. He was described as a bit of a hothead, someone who was passionate about seemingly everything. One reason he was so good at wrestling is he wasn't afraid of anybody. He was willing to take on the best, and he never backed down from a challenge or from a fight. He'd recently been passionate about a girl, named Marlena Romero. His friend said he was in love with her, but after several months of dating, they had broken up, and it was one of those things that bothered him a lot. And he'd hoped that he could rekindle that relationship, but unfortunately, when he approached Marlena about this, she told him that she had a new boyfriend. So Dammion did what anyone would do. He invited the new boy to a party at the so-called wrestling house where he often stayed, and then he immediately jumped him when he showed up. The fight was brief, and Dammion's wrestling teammates were pissed. The wrestling team had a reputation for extracurricular violence outside of the ring, and it was one that they had worked very hard to shed. And now you had Dammion at this massive party in front of all these witnesses who had jeopardized that at the home of not only many of the wrestlers, but also his best friend, who was the captain of the wrestling team. At some point late that night, and we're going to get into the timeline here in a second, Dammion left the party. He was captured on video camera buying gas. After that, he was never seen alive again. 4 days later, he was found on a hiking trail, hanging from a tree by a pair of red jumper cables that came from his own vehicle. But the question remains, was it suicide or was it murder?
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, listeners, whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance. Then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options.
Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Alice, I want to talk about one of our favorite sponsors, Faraday. We were at CrimeCon last week, and if you saw me, I was wearing Faraday clothes because you can wear them when you want to be casual, and you can wear them when you want to be dressed up, and they are always comfortable. No matter what you are looking for, Faraday makes the perfect clothes for you. Faraday is a family-run brand making high-quality, timeless clothing with modern design and functionality. It's that kind of effortless style you want every time you go digging in your closet. That set, that shirt, that dress that feels like you've had them for years. Maybe it's in a gorgeous print and it looks like it might be vintage, but it fits so well that it feels like it was made just yesterday for you. Well, that's Faraday.
Brett, you're so right. I actually chose to wear a Faraday dress for Easter because it was dressed up, it was casual. I could still pick up my kids, but I looked good. And Faraday's so confident in the quality of their stuff, they have a lifetime guarantee of quality. They'll replace or fix your clothes forever, no matter what. Talk about making it easier to get dressed. And right now, Faraday is giving all of you, listeners, 20% off. That's 20% off. So head to FaradayBrand.com/TP and use code TP at checkout to snag 20% off all your new spring staples. That's code TP at Faraday, FAHERTY brand.com/TP for 20% off. FaradayBrand.com/TP.
The Prosecutors is sponsored by BetterHelp, and our listeners get 10% off their first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/prosecutors. That's BetterHelp.com/prosecutors. Whether you're struggling with grief, relationships, or stress, or having trouble sleeping or meeting goals, online therapy might be for you. BetterHelp is secure online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with a licensed professional therapist. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own accredited therapist in as little as 48 hours. You don't have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. The service is available for clients worldwide. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change therapists if needed. Visit BetterHelp.com/prosecutors and join over 2 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. That's BetterHelp.com/prosecutors. BetterHelp, HELP.com/prosecutors for 10% off your first month of online therapy.
So let's dive into the timeline here. In late 2013 to early 2014, Dammion, who is honestly known to date a lot of girls, he's a happy personality, he's affable, he is an attractive person, and he liked it. So he dated lots of girls, but he gets into a steady relationship with Marlena Romero, as Brett just said, and he falls hard for Marlena. But by the spring, as many college relationships do, it started to break up, and so the two of them split ways, and much to Dammion's chagrin, because he still really wanted to be with Marlena. Now, Dammion tried to convince Marlena to get back together with him, but she had started dating another athlete at the school, a track star named Anthony Rios. On Saturday, March 29th, Dammion attends a party at Kyle Piet's house. Kyle is a fellow wrestler at Western Colorado, and he had lived with Dammion the summer before, and they were quite close as friends. But Kyle now lives with Andrew Morris, Elliot Copeland, and Courtney Birch. In addition to attending the party, Dammion made sure to invite Anthony Rios, Marlena's new boyfriend.
And I don't know if Anthony knew what was coming or what, but Dammion sends him a text message. It's basically like, hey, there's a party this time at this place if you're down. And he responds, I'll be there. So I don't know if he had a sneaking suspicion this was going to happen. It seems like Dammion and Anthony had actually been friends. They were both athletes at this school, and they had been friends before this happened. So it may just be that he didn't think anything of it and didn't realize that Dammion had a problem with him dating Marlena. It's a little unclear exactly what happened, but either way, he's going to show up at the party.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brett, because the conversation between Dammion and Anthony about this party is all by text. And as we know, text, you can't really hear sarcasm, you can't hear intonation, tone, anything like that. And the words themselves, you could see them read in either a sarcastic manner, like, oh, we're going to get into it, there's going to be, a showdown, or it can be something innocent. The words quite literally are something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the party's tonight, you coming? And it was, or is it you're down? And he responds, I'm coming. So that could be a completely innocent, you coming? I'm coming. Or something more sarcastic like, are you down? Oh yeah, I'm coming. But we just don't know because, like I said, these are just words in text message. But in any event, we know that Dammion knows Anthony's coming. Anthony knows Dammion's going to be there. At about 11 p.m. that night, it is a pretty typical college party. There's a lot of drinking and there's a lot of just chaos, a normal party, nothing kind of out of the ordinary with respect to an athletic team's party. I think a lot of people coming and going, people party hopping, and people having conversations, and again, a lot of alcohol, if not other substances as well. Anthony arrives at the party, and without warning, Dammion jumped him and began punching Anthony. Anthony is shocked and didn't really fight back. Now, his injuries were minor, and it's actually Dammion who got the worst of it, because one of his punches missed and he smashed the floor instead with such force that he believed he'd broken his hand. Now, this fight didn't last very long. Either Kyle, who was both hosting the party and the captain of the wrestling team, or the captain of the track team, who was also at this party, pulled Dammion off of Anthony. Either way, the fight was soon broken up. Kyle grabbed Dammion and threw him against a wall and held him there, screaming at him that he shouldn't be fighting in the house about a girl and that this was an embarrassment to the wrestling team. After things had calmed down, Dammion found some ice for his hand and spent the rest of the night nursing his wound. Anthony and the track team left. You know, everything that Kyle says to Dammion, remember, they had lived together one summer, so they're pretty close as friends. It honestly sounds pretty normal if this is a party where people are drinking and having fun. And if it's my house and someone starts fighting, I'm going to get mad because if the police come, if anyone gets in trouble, I could be held responsible for it being my house. And furthermore, Kyle has some sort of authority over Dammion because he is the captain of the wrestling team that Dammion is on. And so he may be disciplining him in a way that he would in practice as well. So what Kyle says and does doesn't seem to me that out of line given the situation.
This is another one of those cases. I mean, all cases are like this to a certain extent, but a case like this, I think this is doubly true, where everything that happened is going to be scrutinized, and everything that happened has some deep significance that maybe people didn't realize it had at the time. Remember the question that we're going to be looking at throughout our episodes on this case. Is this murder or is it suicide? And so when you look at something like this, you have a fight, which there's a couple ways to look at this. The fight could be a motive for someone to do something. Obviously, if you're the person who got jumped, maybe you're angry that you got jumped. Maybe your teammates feel like, the honor of the track team has been besmirched and they decide to take revenge later on. Or maybe the wrestling team decides it needs to discipline this person who did this thing, and that leads to something that gets out of hand. I mean, these are the kind of things that you're thinking in the back of your head. I gotta say, I went to college. I went to a lot of parties. Doesn't surprise anybody. And this kind of stuff happens all the time, right? I mean, it just does. I mean, little fights happen at parties all the time. They're quickly broken up, and then people just kind of move on. The way Kyle is acting makes perfect sense to me. I obviously was never a high-level athlete, but those of you who were on teams in college or even really good teams in high school or really any teams, a lot of times the captain of the team, there is this notion of internal discipline, of internal leadership, of setting a standard for your teammates and how they're going to act, not only on the field, but also in life. And this seems to be what's going on here. And Kyle is upset, and he will tell you, if you listen to his interviews with the police, if you read his interviews, the thing that you'll hear is him say, I was pissed. I was very unhappy. I was angry. They were close. They were very close. But he was mad at him for what he'd done, and he let him know that. And he pulls him off of this kid. It varies depending on who you ask exactly what level of force he used. One person said he kind of had him in a headlock, though not a very serious headlock. I believe he at one point says he didn't really do anything physical. Later says he kind of held him up against a wall, which I think in his mind, restraining him is not a physical thing. He's just restraining him. He's not like punching him in the face or anything like that. So this makes sense to me. Now, one thing I want you to remember about this is at 11 o'clock. That's when this happens. That is when emotions are at their hottest, is right after it happens. That's when Kyle's mad. He says at some point they both kind of take a walk. Kyle's like, I need to cool off. So he takes a walk. He goes off. And Dammion does the same thing. He kind of goes off. Then they all both kind of come back to the house. And Kyle kind of goes on with the party. And Dammion, who he's hurt his hand, there will be an autopsy later on that will say he does not actually break his hand. But he didn't know that at the time. All he knew is his hand hurt really bad, and he just punched it into like the concrete floor. So he has reason to think he may have hurt his hand. And his hand probably did hurt, whether it was broken or not. And apparently, he had been, these days leading up to this, people said he just wasn't quite himself. He was angry. He had apparently punched a refrigerator the day before over the same thing, the fact that Marlena was dating this guy. So he's showing his emotions. He's wearing them on his sleeve. He's gotten into this fight. Now he's hurt his hand. He's embarrassed his teammates, and he's kind of upset. And you see examples of that in the way he acts for the rest of the night. The first thing he does is around 11:30 p.m., he texts one of his good friends and tells her, "I'm an effed up person." And she would tell police that this was a very unusual thing for him to text. And it kind of came out of the blue. She didn't really understand why, because she didn't know all the circumstances. And she said this was unusual for Dammion, and he didn't ordinarily say things like that. So she thought that was strange. Now, Dammion at some point, basically the wrestling team kind of takes him into one of the back rooms and really kind of says, just sleep it off. He's laying on the floor of one of the roommates. He's got like a sweater over his head. He's on his phone texting people like this friend. Other friends are coming to this party, and they're kind of making their way back to talk to him. And basically everybody who talks to him says he's laying on the floor with a sweater over his head. He might remove the sweater for a little while to talk to him, but then he just kind of puts it back over his head. And they all say he doesn't seem that unusual to them. He seems like he's a little drunk. Turns out he may also be a little high. He had earlier in the night, on 2 different occasions, purchased LSD from a drug dealer he knew. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. He was also smoking marijuana. When his autopsy will eventually be conducted, the autopsy will find LSD and marijuana in his system, though it won't find alcohol, which I think testifies to the fact he probably wasn't drinking as much as maybe people thought, but he was on these other substances.
And remember also, in addition to the substances, he did just kind of get embarrassed, right? It's over a girl that he still has a lot of feelings for. Maybe in his head, he would have been victorious, or at least, really messed up Anthony and been able to have some pride over that. But instead, he gets ripped off of Anthony by his team captain, who he, I'm sure, respects and likes, and is chastised in front of everyone by his team captain. And worse, rather than inflicting any harm onto Anthony, either emotionally, reputationally, or physically, he actually hurts his own hand because he misses Anthony. So all of this is also kind of an embarrassing night for him. And then you add the substances to it, which can really alter how he would normally respond to things. And you begin to get the full view of maybe why he's sitting there with a hoodie over his head, and why he seems a little forlorn and is maybe texting things he doesn't typically text. It's an extraordinary night.
And I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have reacted violently before in a situation, either in a burst of anger, even if it wasn't violent, just a burst of anger that you didn't anticipate. Maybe you did get in a fight. I'm not somebody who gets angry very easily, but it does happen on rare occasions. And personally, no matter what the outcome, I always feel terrible about it. Like if I get angry and pop off at somebody, I always feel bad about it afterwards. Even if they deserved it, I always feel bad about it. And I feel like Dammion is in that situation. I don't know Dammion, so I'm speculating a little bit here, but I feel like it seemed like a good idea at the time when he got him to come over and he jumps him. It seemed like a good idea in the rage and the emotion. But then basically as soon as it was over and he saw the way everyone reacted and he realized what he did, it upset him and he felt bad about it. And I think this text message confirms that. I think the fact that he's laying on the floor in a back room with his head covering, like Alice said, also helps to show that. Now, one of the people that he reaches out to, and eventually, I think this is going to be pretty significant. One of the people he reaches out to is Tori Boyle, who is a friend of his, and he's trying to get her to come to the party, and she's telling him, I'm not planning on coming to the party. And at around 12:53, he sends a text to her that says, "Sucks for you, LOL." But by 1:15, Tori's changed her mind. Given that Dammion's asking her to come, has asked several times, she decides to come over to the party with one of her friends. She and this friend find Dammion, where everybody else has found him, laying in the floor of Andrew Morris, who was another one of those roommates' bedroom, with this blanket or hoodie or sweatshirt or whatever it is over his head. They ask him, what's going on, what's wrong. He says that he's tired, and they thought that meant he was just going to go to bed. And this was normal. Ordinarily, Dammion stayed at Kyle's house when he'd been partying. He had lived at Kyle's house the summer before. They were very close friends. It was known as the wrestler's house. And in fact, one of the couches, they jokingly called it Dammion's couch, because that was the couch that he would sleep on nights like this. But at some point after this, rather than going to sleep and rather than staying at the house, Dammion leaves. Now, we know that around 1:15, as all this is happening, Dammion also texts another girl named Lacey Miller and invites her over to his dorm room. She says that she will, but when she calls him at 1:30, his cell phone is off, and she's never able to get in touch with him. Again, why Dammion turned off his phone, we don't know. But what we do know is at some point between 1:15, when he's talking to Tori and when he's talking to Lacey, he's texting with Lacey, he decides to leave. He walks from the wrestling house back to campus where his car is parked. He then gets in his car and goes to get gasoline. We know this because at 1:38 a.m., he is caught on video camera at the City Market Shopping Center. There he puts $25 worth of gas into his car, which apparently at that time, and with his vehicle, which was an SUV, that is about a half tank of gas. Now, this is the last confirmed sighting of Dammion when he was alive. At that point, he is wearing a large, camouflaged, hooded sweatshirt that he'd borrowed from a friend at the party.
Dammion had been texting friends that night, but then around that period, all texts from him stop. And apparently he uses different messaging apps to text different girls. So all of the forms of communication he typically used kind of abruptly stops around this time. That same morning at 10 a.m., Linda Ninehauser, the Gunnison County Finance Director, pulls up to the Cabin Creek Road for a hike. Cabin Creek is about 7 miles from campus and is a nature walk that can be popular for locals. Linda notices 2 cars parked at the head of the hiking trail. One is a black Saturn SUV. This is Dammion's vehicle. And the other is a white truck with a white camper top over the bed with a breast cancer awareness plate. Linda walked down the 2-mile trail to a rock quarry, noticing nothing all that unusual. And at some point, she passed 2 bikes that were locked to a fence post. Now, Linda hangs out there for a little bit, spends some time, has a snack, and about 2 p.m., as she walked back up the trail to her car, Linda assumed she was alone and started singing loudly to herself. And it was then that she was startled when she saw 2 people standing near some trees on higher ground above where she was walking. One of the people was squatted down and may have been looking at her through binoculars, which really shook her when she thought she was being watched and kind of embarrassed that she had been assuming she was alone and therefore singing out loud. Now, the other person she saw was wearing camouflage. She said that this person's feet seemed to be pointing in the wrong direction. Not exactly sure what that means, but she notes that later on. She said it seemed like the person's feet were pointing in the wrong direction. Linda's embarrassed about her singing and also a little creeped out because she thinks she's being watched. So Linda quickly averts her gaze and hurried back to her vehicle, thinking nothing more of it.
And this is all happening on Sunday. I don't know if we made that entirely clear. The party was Saturday night, moving into Sunday morning. Linda is showing up at the trail around 10 a.m. We're going to talk more about Linda in depth here in a bit, but we wanted to give you an idea of generally what she saw and when she saw it. She's on the trail for about 4 hours. When she leaves, that truck is still there. It was there when she got there. There were the 2 bikes. It was obvious the bikes had been ridden down the trail because she could see the bike tracks. This was something she liked to do right around this time period. she would kind of go down to the rock quarry and meditate. So she's hanging out for a good period of time. She's got her dog with her. She's hanging out. She finally walks back 4 hours later at 2 o'clock, and she's singing. She's having a great time. And that's when she sees this. It's obvious that this is a quick glance for her, because when she sees these people, it freaks her out for a couple different reasons, because they're staring at her and everything else. She averts her gaze. She doesn't see a lot. This whole feet pointing the wrong direction thing, she thinks the person is looking at her, but it'll turn out later on that when the police find Dammion's body, that in fact his back would have been to her. So the reason his feet were pointing the wrong direction is because he wasn't looking at her. He was facing the other direction. Now that's on Sunday. On Monday, or by Monday, you got to remember, so Sunday happens and none of Dammion's friends hear from him. And this is weird because normally he spends the night with them. He didn't spend the night with them. They don't hear from him on Sunday. They're getting a little concerned, and there's some thought, and maybe even rumors start to spread, that he's so upset about the fight that he's just driven back to Texas. He's driven back to Texas to get his mind right. So they actually call his dad. Some of his friends call his dad and say, hey, we haven't seen Dammion. Have you heard from him? He says no. On Monday, he calls the university, and the university tells him, yeah, we've got some records. It looks like he was in class. He's using his dining card. Everything's fine. But then Monday night, they call him back and say, we were mistaken. We don't have any record of him being in class. We don't have any record of him using his dining card. At this point, his father is concerned. He calls the police and puts in a missing person. This missing person. He's concerned about his son. So that's on Monday.
The university has like a card system where you can use for eating at the cafeteria or signing into your classes. But as you know, attendance is kind of difficult sometimes in a college setting because these classes, especially larger classes, there can be, dozens, if not hundreds of students. Different colleges have different ways of tracking attendance. There's 2 ways, I believe, at Western Colorado. You can quite literally use your card, but you could also key in a code. And I can imagine that there's probably lots of volume happening every day. There's lots of classes. There's lots of key cards being used. And so I'm not sure what accounted for their mistake, but it's possible they weren't really taking anything seriously in terms of concern about Dammion. And so they may have quickly looked at records and not looked at the right date, or the correct data may not have been pulled for the day at the time. And it maybe wasn't until later that night that they checked their records and realized that the information they gave Dammion's father earlier in the day was incorrect. So it's not really been clear what caused their initial response stating that Dammion's card was used. But I think it's clear that when they actually looked at their records and kind of realized the importance of what these records mean, Dammion's card had not been used.
Yeah, and Dammion's card was broken, and it was found on his body. As we said, and as we're going to say later on, whatever you think about the various sightings and everything else, Linda, one thing I think we can say for certain is she saw Dammion's body on Sunday. So Dammion was dead on Sunday. He was dead Sunday morning. No later than 2 p.m. He was definitely deceased. So he wasn't using his card on campus. He had it with him. It was also broken, so he couldn't use it. So if it was used, he would have had to key in his number, like Alice said. Unlikely that many people knew that number. There's a couple things that might have happened here. The first thing, it's possible that some administrator gets a call from a dad and is like, yeah, whatever, he's fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. And then realize later on, oh, actually, he's not fine. He hasn't been in these classes. The other possibility, I taught a class recently at a college. It was actually at a law school, but same thing. And the way I took attendance was I gave them a sheet of paper and said, sign your name. And if you signed somebody else's name on there as well, so they'd get credit, I didn't care and I didn't check. If I got the sheet back with that person's name on it, guess what? They had attended class. And remember, Dammion's a wrestler. And that means he has certain academic things he has to live up to. He has to attend class. If he doesn't attend class, he may not be able to be a wrestler anymore, or he may be punished, might have to run laps. And there's all sorts of things that teams and colleges do to their athletes to make sure they're attending class. the classes that he was in and the classes where he supposedly attended, there were other wrestlers in those classes. So if they looked around and didn't see Dammion and they thought, man, he had a bad weekend, he probably drove to Texas, them signing his name on the roll, highly likely. Wouldn't shock me at all. Wouldn't surprise me at all. The other thing that happens in colleges is a lot of times the professors also will do things like protect the athletes. Everybody knows this happens. So, I hope this isn't a shock to anybody that there are a lot of professors who are happy to help athletes just as much as anybody so that they can maintain their eligibility. So there's all sorts of ways that it could appear that Dammion was attending classes when in fact he wasn't. I think Alice is right. This is either a clerical error or it's some friends helping out. What it's not is Dammion's not there. I don't think anyone is impersonating Dammion either. There's no reason to do that. It doesn't really make sense in any of the theories we're going to talk about. But it seems like this is just a mistake. Having said that, this mistake is one of those things that people spend a lot of time on who think there's some sort of foul play going on here. One thing I would remind you, if Dammion was murdered, there might be a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy of everybody in town. It's not a conspiracy of the university and the police and the wrestling team and the track team, everybody together. There's not some grand code of silence going on in this little town in Colorado to cover this up. There might be a couple people who are involved, but it's not everybody. So the university wasn't faking anything to somehow protect Dammion. This is probably just a mistake. And once again, if this is murder, it doesn't actually make any sense to do this. If your whole point is to make it look like a suicide and the person has already been staged where their body's going to be found, it doesn't make any sense to mess that up by faking their presence other places. It's completely absurd because their body can be found at any time. Once you set them up, somebody like Linda could come along, realize what they've seen, and call the police. And remember, Linda believes, at least initially, there might be another person there with binoculars watching her. If that's true, then presumably that person is involved in Dammion's death. It's hard to believe they would just be there with the body and not have something to do with it, which means they would know on Sunday that someone has seen the body. And that means they're not going to have any interest on Monday trying to make it look like Dammion's still alive. So this is a thing that happens, but it's very clearly either some sort of red herring or some sort of mistake. But I think it's pretty clear it's not directly involved in whatever happened to Dammion.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting facts that's actually a red herring, the key card being used or not used.
And we might as well just go ahead and talk about this as well. Also, during this time, a couple of people who were on the wrestling team think they see Dammion's car driving around Gunnison, this little town in Colorado. I don't know how little it is. I keep calling it little town. This college town in Colorado where they're all going to school. They're at the subway. They're getting lunch. They look out the window, and they see a car matching Dammion's car. It's a Saturn Vue SUV driving down the road, and they think it's Dammion. And they notice a couple things about the car. They notice that the license plate is hanging by sort of one screw. They think it's Dammion's car. And they will later tell the police about this, that, hey, we saw the car, we thought it was Dammion's. For all the same reasons we just talked about, it is highly unlikely that they actually saw Dammion. Because once again, there's really no reason to be driving the car around on Monday or Tuesday when Dammion's body has been spotted on Sunday and has been on that hillside since Sunday. It really doesn't make any sense to be doing that. Linda saw the car exactly where it would be found, which is on this hiking trail, at the beginning of this hiking trail, when she sees the body. So why you would then move the car again doesn't really make any sense. Second thing, when they found the car, the license plate was attached. There was no screw missing. It wasn't hanging by a screw. Really unclear why you would do that if you were driving the car. Why you would either fix it if it were broken, because once again, if that's just the way it was, that's just the way it was. Or, as some people have speculated, change the license plates out for the purpose of driving it around town. I don't know why you would do that, because if you're trying to show it's Dammion still alive, doesn't make any sense. You obviously don't need his vehicle to accomplish anything you're trying to accomplish, so I don't know why you would do that. And just changing the license plate isn't going to change the fact that the black SUV that people know is driving around town. So whatever these guys saw, it wasn't Dammion's car. It was somebody else's car that just happened to look like Dammion's SUV.
Right. It doesn't really make sense if you. There's no reason to drive the car after the fact, right? Because we know when by what time Dammion was dead. And it was by Sunday morning, he was dead, if not before that. And if you're driving his car after the fact, all you're doing is creating the possibility of you being spotted in a dead person's car, your DNA getting spread all over a dead person's car, and then returning it to its scene. And when the car is found by police, they find about half a tank of gas. So just about the amount that $25 worth of gas would be for his car. And so it seems that Dammion got the gas and it wasn't driven very far, because the amount of gas he put in is about the amount of gas that it was found with. And really, this whole license plate thing really boggles my mind, why anyone would mess with the license plate, have it hanging off, either fix it or not fix it or change the license plate. None of it really makes sense for why you would do that if you were trying to tamper with the scene or have the body set up. None of it makes sense. I'm not even sure what the purpose of, taking off a screw or of the license plate or changing out the license plate would have on setting up a body.
The other thing I want to say, one thing that people have said is that Dammion had a very unique vehicle. He had a Saturn Vue. It's funny, Saturn seemed to come up more than you would think. Maura Murray owned a Saturn. My wife owned a Saturn. Dammion owned a Saturn. But one of the points people make is the Saturn Vue was a rare car. Don't even know if there were any other Saturn Vues in the town at the time. So if you see a black car that is a Saturn Vue, it must be Dammion's. There are a couple of problems with that. Most of you know that your car, whatever kind of car you have, it's not unique. It is built on a platform, and many different kinds of cars have that platform. Saturn was a GM vehicle. The Saturn Vue was built on the GM Theta platform. In addition to the Vue, the Chevrolet Captiva, the Captiva Sport, the Chevrolet Equinox, the Daewoo Windstorm, the Pontiac Torrent, the Suzuki XL7, the GMC Terrain, the Saab 94X, and the Opel Antera were the same platform, which means they had a different emblem on the car, but the chassis was basically the same. So what's possible is that what these guys saw was a dark-colored GM vehicle of a similar make speeding down the road, and in the brief second they saw it, they thought it was Dammion's car. They specifically say it was speeding, so it was moving at high speed. So they didn't get a good look at it or a long look at it. They just saw a car that matched his description leaving. So I just point that out, that just because it's a Saturn Vue, and there might not have been many Saturn Vues, doesn't mean there aren't a bunch of other cars that looked like that car, and in fact may have looked exactly like that car because of the similar chassis. And even if it weren't a Chevy, the Vue is a crossover vehicle. It's a smaller SUV. Those were very popular at the time. Could very well have been another model that just looked a lot like that car.
And, Western Colorado is a small university, but it's not tiny. I mean, between the undergrads and graduate students, they have over 3,000 students. And while Gunnison itself is not a huge town, it still has about, I think, just under 7,000 people. So under 7,000 people in the town, and it's next to other towns as well. So we're just talking about Gunnison itself. And then plus another 3,000 students at Western Colorado. That's about 10,000 people, many of whom are coming from out of town, because college campus, I think Western Colorado, still draws from a good percentage of student coming from out of state, just like Dammion. And so to say out of 10,000 people, or 10,000, not all of those people drive, but having only a couple Saturn SUVs, I don't know. I think there may be many people in the town or in the university who have cars that are similar to Dammion's, and you wouldn't necessarily know all the cars in a town of that size, though it is a relatively small town.
And I would just remind people that Gunnison, those of you who know Colorado, is sort of in between Denver and Grand Junction. This is an outdoors area. It's the kind of place that you go for things like skiing and hiking. everybody in Colorado's got an SUV of some sort. This is right around the end of March, early April, so it's still ski season, but late ski season. It wouldn't be that surprising for people from out of town, like Alice said, to be driving around the weekend, that kind of time. So there's all sorts of people this could have been. And this is one of those things that we talk about a lot. Eyewitness testimony and all the problems with eyewitness testimony. You see something, you see it very briefly, you don't realize it's important at the time. And then later on, days later, weeks later, I think it was a month later when these guys were interviewed by the police, you're trying to reconstruct in your mind what you saw. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to think you saw things you didn't see. And eyewitness testimony is just really dangerous and unreliable. So when you hear stuff like this, you really have to think about whether it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. And frankly, whether Dammion was murdered or whether suicide is involved, well, certainly if suicide's involved, but if Dammion were murdered, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no theory that I can put together in my head where driving Dammion's car around the day after you've staged his body on a public hiking trail where anyone can see it, and in fact, someone has already seen it, and if you were there with your binoculars, you know that, there's no situation in which it makes sense to be driving his car around. The only thing you're going to do is make people question your staging. Because if people see the car, they're going to think, well, that must have been staged because he wasn't driving it around because he was dead, just like people are doing. So when you can't figure out how it would fit, and it's based on the barest of eyewitness statements, most likely the eyewitness got it wrong. So that's on Monday/Tuesday. The police are starting to look for Dammion. They're starting to ask people about him. They're starting to get witness testimony. On Wednesday, April 2nd, though, is when they find out exactly what happened. At around 10 a.m., a patrol officer on Cabin Creek Road finds Dammion's black SUV. He found some unusual things. He looks in the window and he sees that the driver's seat is reclined. Second, he notices a cell phone in the passenger seat, but it is disassembled, and the battery has been removed. Later on, the police will check this phone for fingerprints and DNA. The only DNA they find on the phone is Dammion's. They look around the vehicle. They don't really see any footprints or tire tracks, so that doesn't help them much, but it doesn't take them long to find the body because it's only about 100 yards up the trail when they see Dammion hanging from a tree on a cliffside by a noose that has been fashioned from red jumper cables. These jumper cables will later be determined came from Dammion's car. Some unusual things about him: his shoes are untied and his pants are unzipped. He is still wearing the camouflage sweatshirt that he was seen wearing in the video when he was buying gasoline. This actually was not his sweatshirt. It was a sweatshirt from his friend who lived at the wrestling house, the one whose room he was laying in. Apparently, he had taken that sweatshirt from that room. The police investigate this, as we're going to talk about. And by June 2014, the Gunnison Police Department, they feel pretty confident that this is a suicide, not a murder. Just to be sure, they actually asked the Denver Police Department to review their file and give them a second opinion. Denver agrees to do so, and upon looking at the file, they agree that this was a suicide. On October 21st, 2014, 6 months after Dammion's death, the police do rule Dammion's death to be a suicide.
So here you've heard the timeline of what unfolded. Now, we've already touched on some of the unusual aspects, and we'll dive more into them next time. But I think you're beginning to see where what happens that night at that party is very important, but also still leaves a lot of questions, because you're going to have a lot of witnesses, but a lot of witnesses who are not necessarily aware of all the things that are going around them, because there are so many people at a party. There is drinking, and it's late at night when people are tired, when people are coming and going, and Dammion is coming and going. And so we've put together this timeline to try and orient you, but I think you can already tell that there's going to be a lot of witness testimony, and when you have this many witnesses all present at the same event, even if everyone had perfect memories, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get, if you've talked to 50 people, you're going to get 50 different stories. That's just the nature of our memories and also in how we convey what we remember. We see this all the time in our cases, and that's honestly why cross-examination exists, right? Is because people communicate in different ways. People have faulty memories. People interpret the exact same event, even the same words, differently. And we are going to face that as we dig more into what happened to Dammion that night.
And memory is so faulty. It is so faulty. I mean, I've basically come to the conclusion that if all you have is a witness who says they saw something, you don't really have enough to convict somebody. You really need some sort of supporting evidence, some sort of physical evidence, something more concrete, just because people just don't remember things. And like Alice said, one thing to always remember, most of the people who are going to give accounts of everything that happened were probably drunk at the time or under some other influence. Or even if they weren't drunk, they'd been drinking. And they didn't realize what they were watching was important at the time. And frankly, even when people know something's important and they're supposed to be paying attention, they will often miss important things. Many conspiracy theories have been born of the fact that people say things that are demonstrably not true. And they're not lying. They just don't remember. Or they could swear that that's the way it happened, but it's not. You see this with 9/11. Most of the 9/11 conspiracy theories are built on people misremembering things or saying things that didn't happen. And from that, this sort of story is spun about, well, this must be a conspiracy. They're trying to cover something up. And in reality, most people do the best they can. It's just frankly not that good. And I think you're going to see some of that. And I think we already have seen some of that. I mean, this idea about seeing him in class or seeing his car, almost certainly not true. Almost impossible to figure out a way it would be true, no matter what actually happened. And that's just something to always remember, not just about this case, but about all cases. When people are really hammering or really focusing on some sort of mistake that someone makes, sometimes it's just a mistake, and that's all it is. It's nothing nefarious. It's just a mistake, and that's always something to remember. We finished up the timeline. Like Alice said, we're going to look into more of the unusual aspects of this case next week. Interested to hear what you think about this. Shoot us up at ProsecutorsPod at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. ProsecutorsPod@gmail.com. ProsecutorsPodcast.com for the website. Join Patreon if you're so inclined and don't like ads. Join us on the gallery on Facebook. We have a subreddit if you want to hang out there. I think by the time this comes out, we'll either be back from CrimeCon. I think we'll be back from CrimeCon. So hopefully we met a lot of you guys at CrimeCon. Hope you guys had a good time. Hope we got to see you. We, as we record this, can't wait. But, we know how much fun it's going to be, and we can't wait to see you guys. That's all we have for today. Remember, keep it respectful when you're discussing this case in all cases. We know you will. Alice, do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off?
There's still a lot to talk about, so I'm glad that we're not trying to fit this all into one episode. Come back next time as we really dive into some of the issues we've already flagged for you. And if you have thoughts, let us know.
That would be a long episode, so we're definitely going to do this one in two. All right, guys, we'll be back next week with more on the case of Dammion Hurd. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. More people think that Marion never came back to Australia than I would have thought.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. Like,
I think our
point was really well made. Is you don't need her passport to be stamped to be draining her account. There's no point in faking her. Whatever.
Yeah, her reentry. It doesn't make any sense.
Re-entry.
And Bloom left before she did. He came back in like July 29th. And I think that's why she called Sally, because I think Bloom was with her all the other times, and then he's gone. And I think she just used that as an excuse, the whole rock slide thing.
I think she knew what she was doing on that last call. That's why she was so persistent, like keep talking even though my time's running out, because literally her time was running out and she couldn't call back the next day, you know.
I think she always intended to get back in touch with Sam. Eventually. It was just going to be a while. I think it was...
She needed
they
to
were
like
gonna get their
convince
whole lives
him
sorted.
it was all good, you know. Because
Right.
he probably was like, they don't even love me.
Stream the biggest movies and TV shows for free on PlutoTV. Watch movies like Titanic and G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, plus TV shows like CSI and Star Trek: The Next Generation. Starting this month, check out the 24/7 Stargate channel exclusively on PlutoTV. Plus hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows absolutely free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start watching today.